Okay, welcome back. We are in the Christopher Love trial. That is the detective that took the statement from the defendant, Love. I have got my main man here, Gene Rossi. Gene, I actually did a new bio on you. We should have like a baseball card with your picture on one side, your stats on the other. 30 years at the DOJ, 110 federal trials. Unprecedented. That's a quote. Unprecedented 90 jury trials. He was in the rocket docket in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia. He's trained over 1,000 prosecutors for the Department of Justice. He lectures. He does it all. And why do I call him hashtag 4041? Because when he was living in Connecticut, this guy's all over the country, he scored 40 and then 41 points because he was an all-star, all-state basketball player, 1,300 career points. Welcome back, Gene.
I wanted to be Ernie DiGregorio.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, definitely. But don't we all? Hey, Gene, listen, this guy, this detective, I love the guy. You know, there's a technique about getting people to continue to talk, not to invoke their rights to remain silent in the middle of an interview and to get data. It takes a very special person. What are your thoughts about how he's doing?
I think that detective should get a gold star and a detective's medal of honor. His style is incredible. He is socializing with the defendant. He provided him food. He's talking about his own job and how fulfilling it is. He's really becoming a friend of the target, the defendant, and that is the best strategy of all time. You've seen these, Bob, some of these interviews with detectives. They go into the interview and they're literally guns blazing. They got their gun in their holster. Yep. They're in the defendant's face. Yep. And they get nothing out of the interview other than this: I want to speak to my attorney.
Yeah. Hey, Gene, you know, the best guy I've ever seen do this, and he's actually a good friend of mine now, is one of my tactical operations captains. He got statements from everyone spoke to him. He would take his gun, his badge off. He'd go in just like this guy's doing. He was great at getting data, establishing a relationship. And to his credit, in a murder case that I tried where he was the person who got the confession, the defense's only argument to throw the confession out was that my tactical operations captain was too nice to him. That was the legal argument. I'm not even making it up.
It doesn't get any better than that, the too nice argument.
Right. And, you know, and the guy said something the detective, very interesting on the witness stand, too, is that you got to kind of move around with these guys in terms of their story and press them. Because we've seen not only a lot of detectives that just shut the defendant down, but they don't really probe or go deeper. They just take the basic story and then they walk out.
All I can tell you is this interview is now 10, 11, 12 hours. I mean, he is really just being relentless, the detective. You're right. I've seen interviews that are about a half hour. It's in your face. And at the end of the day, you can't even use this statement because there's really nothing to help you.
Well, Gene Rossi, listen, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Law and Crime Network is now on Pluto TV. If you guys go online, you can see where this is being distributed all over the place. I love you guys to be inside the chat room and to be able to answer your questions, which I do when I'm off camera. And boy, Gene, we're really knocking it dead here at the Law and Crime Network in terms of getting out there. And guys like you and our other guests and hosts are the ones that are making that possible. We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll come back on the other end. Welcome back. Well, Gene, that's Detective Barnes, and he's just hanging in there, feeding it a little bit at a time, kind of moving around with the defendant. He's not giving up. He's feeding him. He's talking to him nice. Sometimes he changes his cadence and gets a little hard with him. I think this detective's doing a great job. I know you do too. One of the people, one of the producers in the show, was talking about why do defendants talk for so long? Some don't, some do. What's your experience that way?
I got a little overlap, Bob. I'm hearing the interview while I'm hearing you.
Yeah, okay, so you're hearing the interview and you're hearing me. Gene, what I'm trying to get to is that some defendants speak and some don't, and when some do speak, they speak for hours and hours and hours on end without invoking an attorney. So, you know, have you come up with anything in your career as to why that is, that some speak and some don't?
Yes, intelligence, education, and complete arrogance. That's number one. A defendant or target that thinks he's the smartest person in the room, if not the planet, will try to talk to police till the cows come home because they think they can talk themselves out of the trouble. And also, if the detective is not in the face of that person, then you'll have a defendant or target talking a lot. Even if you have an intelligent person, if the detective's really aggressive, the intelligent target may say, I need a lawyer. But if you got somebody who's cocky, they are going to talk.
Well, you know, my experience, Gene, was I was an assistant prosecutor in a very urban county. And in the 7 years I was there doing homicide work, I can't remember a case where the more street savvy defendant actually spoke. They all said, I want a lawyer, I don't want to talk. When I became the head prosecutor of a suburban county, very wealthy county, very highly educated populace, when I first got there, in every single murder case we had, it seemed like everybody was giving a statement, and I started to wonder to myself, are the cops doing something up here that they're not supposed to be doing? And the answer simply got to the point that you said. They felt like they could outsmart the police, and they didn't have the street sense that the more urban community defendants had.
I did a lot of prosecutions of doctors, pill mills, prescribers, and I can't tell you how many times an FBI agent would go to a potential target, a pill mill doctor, and that doctor would talk to the FBI agent for 5 hours because the doctor thought that he was the smartest person on the planet and could talk his way out of it because, you know, judges and doctors, they have sort of the God complex at times.
Right, Gene. Okay, listen, Gene Rossi, appreciate you being here. This is a fascinating case, murder for hire. We're going to go to a break, and we're going to come back on the other end with more law and crime and the Christopher Love trial. Okay, so Gene, Detective Barnes is a master. He's skillful. He's not only a great interrogator, but he's also got the additional ability to testify very professionally, clean, crisp, articulate, knows the law. What do you think?
On a scale of 1 to 10, he's a 12. I would love to have Detective Barnes in any of my cases, past or future. He's excellent.
Yeah, now, he did something that, like a lot of great, but again, it's a skill set. It's not too dissimilar to cross-examination sometimes, or examination we do as lawyers, where he said he had to, quote-unquote, turn it up from being jovial to being a little bit more pointed. So there's that tipping spot where you've built that relationship, you're going easy, but you got to get more data. So you got to like kind of crank it up a little bit, but not get to a point where he starts to, as we would say, pucker up and ask for the lawyer.
Right. And Bob, I got to tell a story. 1991, I did a horrible cross. I went from a constructive cross to a destructive. It was horrible. What he did was he's doing a constructive interrogation. He's bringing out facts without being a sledgehammer. And then he got a little tough at times, but it wasn't over the top. It was very proportional. And that's why he's a 12 on a scale of 10.
Right. He's bringing out little shards of facts, but he's not giving the guy, he's letting him think he's got more data than he really has. What I've also noticed with great interrogators is when they get to the personal point, he knows the defendant, Brenda's been spoken to, and the officer uses that psychologically against him and says, you think Brenda's going to help you? Who's going to speak up for you? Basically saying, here's your opportunity to speak up for yourself. You got 15 seconds, Gene. What are your thoughts about that technique?
That is a fabulous technique because what he's doing is all these other people are out there pointing a finger at you. What's your response? And you're kind of politely poking the bear and getting him through either body language or words to say something inculpatory.
Right. Listen, Gene, this guy is top notch. We're in the Christopher Love case. We're going to go to a break, and we're going to come back more with Detective Barnes. Okay, welcome back. So that is the detective taking the statement of Love testifying in court. Gene Rossi, we've talked about the mad skills of this detective. He started to ratchet it up. He went from the jovial place to where he started feeding him with little pieces of information. He's now got him at the crime scene. He's got him admitting to a robbery. He's got him admitting to who the co-conspirators were. And now he's at a point where he's saying the video shows you walking up, nobody else getting out, and the driver never gets out, and that's what we can prove. And you can see the stress on the defendant as he's mumbling and just laying his head back. He is thinking a million miles a minute. What can I do to help myself out?
The beauty of a video confession is not just the words. The body language of this defendant is probably going to cost him the death penalty. He is thinking, he is contemplating, he's not acting like a man who's innocent. That's probably the most devastating part of the video, his pauses and his silence.
Right, and it's always helpful when you're in front of a jury with your weed shirt on when you're confessing to a robbery/murder. Anyway, listen, we got to go to a break, Gene. We're going to be back on the other end. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back. They are now on lunch break in the Love case. The prosecutor's direct examination of Detective Barnes has been completed. Gene Rossi is with me. Gene, Love, this guy, and I guess I do mean the pun. This detective, he is awesome. And I gotta like the one little funny line maybe our viewers didn't get to hear while we were on break. The only time he left was when he wanted to brush his teeth because he wanted to have his fresh breath for Mr. Love. This guy he had it all, man.
Absolutely. He is not going to upset the apple cart one bit, and his breath, maybe put on some cologne, who knows? But,
yeah, and so he's really brought this guy from, I don't know what you're talking about, to at the scene of the crime. He was tenacious. He didn't just leave it there. He was bringing out the video evidence to try to push him into a confession that this was actually a murder as opposed to a robbery gone bad or that somebody else did it. I can't imagine, Gene, you tell me, a prosecutor's detective doing any better in being on the witness stand, explaining how it all unfolded. And as you indicated, the videotape speaks for itself.
Well, what the prosecutor should do is, for the next 3 years, play portions of this interview for training of new detectives and homicide agents, because it's really it's a class. We just went to class today.
Yeah, and Gene, the other important thing about this is that I don't think the prosecutor has any doubt in their mind when you're doing death penalty litigation that there's going to be a murder conviction here. But they're looking for capital punishment. They're looking to convince a jury that the right thing to do, as our chatters are talking about, is to execute the guy. So let's get into the idea that he just doesn't make, as you indicated before, a very likable person. It's a lot different than when somebody just falls on the sword crying and saying, I did a horrible, terrible thing. This is a plot, a hire for murder, best aggravating factor for the death penalty. Yes?
Absolutely. I've seen confessions. I've never tried a death penalty case, but I supervised and obviously was aware of them. The most devastating thing is when a defendant doesn't show any remorse. And not only the pauses were devastating in this interview, but he did not act like a man who felt any guilt about executing a dentist in a parking lot, cold-blooded murder. He showed no remorse. There wasn't even a crocodile tear. And that's probably going to be the reason why the jury will find death penalty.
Right. Listen, having tried death penalty cases as a prosecutor, I know that it's very, very difficult to ask people. Each individual juror has to make a specific individual, not collective decision. Collectively, they come out. They all have to agree. Texas is a big death penalty state. But nevertheless, you're asking people to do a really, really difficult thing. And a lot of times people act on the emotion of it. It's a horrible murder. This girl did absolutely nothing wrong. She was a beautiful, wonderful person. And this guy, just for a couple of shekels, is going in there and just essentially executing her and has no remorse, like you said. I don't see it getting much better than that from the standpoint of the prosecutor getting a death penalty conviction.
And the other thing is, I totally agree. The emotion in this case is probably going to carry the ball across the line for the death penalty. Bob, am I missing something? How in God's name can they have two photos of the victim right next to the witness box throughout the whole? I'm a little embarrassed by it, because that's really over the top.
Gene, this is Pandora's box. We have been talking about this nonstop. Kathy Russin from the Law and Crime Network has seen it before, at least in Texas, and others have indicated maybe some other states. I don't know. I'd love to do a study on this because at least from you, from Virginia, from D.C., New Jersey, New York, when I've brought this issue up, people were in shock, at least from the milieu that we're used to here. I'd love to see how many states allow this. This is victim impact testimony in the guilt phase of a capital murder case.
I'm actually embarrassed, and I got to tell you this. If they get a conviction on the death penalty, I can see this going to the Supreme Court because this is unduly prejudicial. My heart bleeds for Dr. Hatcher. Of course it bleeds. I mean, she died and got executed, but you got to do it fairly, and this is very prejudicial in the guilt phase.
Yeah, and as you've indicated, victim impact testimony can be done in sentencing phases, maybe even appropriate in the penalty phase. I know just at least in Jersey where they're very, very rough on the death penalty, very hard on prosecutors. You were on a fine wire at any moment that you could say or do something that a court or the Supreme Court was just waiting for you to trip on a little bit of a mistake in order to throw the death penalty out. And then you have places like Florida and Texas where it's more liberal given. And Gene, that is the reason ultimately I came to the conclusion that I was against the death penalty, even though I was involved in those cases, because it can be literally that arbitrary in the manner in which these cases are tried from state to state.
Absolutely. And for the readers and the people watching your show, your wonderful show, there's a case called United States versus George Torres, Torres. It's federal court in Alexandria. And in that case, there was a false confession of someone else to 2 murders for which they attributed to George Torres, who was guilty. And so I was worried about a false confession in this case, but also you can't have a jury room or a courtroom with prejudicial actions. Those 2 photos are bad. They're bad.
Well, Gene, we had talked the other day with a number of people, and one of the reasons, just so our viewers understand, is that typically speaking, anything that the jury sees has to be relevant. There has to be relevance. It needs to, and that basically is it tends to prove or disprove a certain thing. And her and her dentist jacket, with all due respect to this beautiful, lovely woman, it bears no value to the evidence in the case. It is just merely there for the purposes of prejudicing, if you will. I guess in Texas they say that the victim's presence is allowed to be in that courtroom. Again, I hope that our people here at Law and Crime or can do a state-by-state analysis of this or how this is allowed.
Here's what's going to happen. He's going to be found guilty, death penalty. He's going to be sent to state prison. And he is going to file a petition in federal court for ineffective assistance of counsel for the attorneys to allow those 2 photos to be up there. I'm assuming they have not made a motion to get them taken down. If they did not do that, that to me is ineffective assistance of counsel in a death penalty case.
Yeah, I would imagine that the lawyers, it's a great question, that maybe we can find that out too. I would imagine the lawyers would have objected to this. And I would imagine, obviously, from what Kathy Russin is telling us, it's not the first time this has been done, at least in Texas. So I can't imagine that it hasn't been argued by some really good defense lawyers down there in Texas through their courts, at least, to say this is incredibly prejudicial and that it's been sanctioned, it's allowed.
If it were federal court in Alexandria, Virginia, the prosecutor would be cuffed and held in contempt.
And, Gene, let's get to one last point. As a prosecutor especially, you know this. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Absolutely.
Right. All right, listen, Gene Rossi, it's always great having you. Hashtag 4041. Love having you on my show. But another part that we do here at the Law and Crime Network, Gene, that you know we love is Top Crimes. Let's get to it.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. The gunman suspected of killing a University of Utah track and field team member was found dead in a Salt Lake City church. 37-year-old Melvin Rowland, a registered sex offender, was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the Trinity AME Church. Authorities were pursuing Rowland after he allegedly shot and killed his ex-girlfriend, 21-year-old Lauren McCluskey, as she spoke to her mother on the phone near a dormitory on campus. Rowland was convicted of attempted forcible sex abuse and enticing a minor over the internet in 2004 and was registered as a sex offender. Former New York Mets star outfielder Lenny Dykstra pleaded not guilty to criminal charges from an incident with an Uber driver in New Jersey. Dykstra was arrested after reportedly arguing with his Uber driver and allegedly placed a bag with what the driver believed was a gun against the driver's head and threatened to shoot the man if he didn't take him to Staten Island. When police arrived, they found cocaine, MDMA, and marijuana on Dykstra, and he was taken into custody. Dykstra now faces drug charges and one count of making terroristic threats in the third degree. A man from Florida accused of groping a fellow female passenger on a Southwest Airlines flight from Houston to Albuquerque reportedly told investigators the inappropriate touching was okay since President Trump says it's okay. 49-year-old Bruce Michael Alexander of Tampa was arrested and charged with abusive sexual contact after he reportedly grabbed a woman's breast during the flight. Alexander remains in custody pending a preliminary hearing and detention hearing. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Okay, welcome back. Gene, amazing case. I truly believe, having been in this position as a prosecutor, and I'm sure you have too, that you know the defendant's guilty, the evidence is weak, you're not sure whether you're going to make it over the goal line, and then God comes to you and says the defendant is going to testify. And bam, they put themselves in the jackpot.
Yeah. I think if she hadn't testified, it may have still been a guilty, but I think the chances of a hung jury, if not an acquittal, would have been better if she did not testify. Here's what I'd like to know, Bob. Did she make the decision to testify, or did her attorneys suggest that she testified over her objection?
Gene, let's go back to a little bit of that. We discussed that the other day we're here. The other day when you were on. I don't know if we'll ever get know that answer, but we were talking about, as a lawyer, how do you protect the record? Maybe you can go through that real quick. You had two suggestions as to what to do as a lawyer when you say, don't get on the stand, and the client insists.
Here's what I've seen in my cases. The jury's out of the room. The judge says, okay, defendant, are you willing to take the stand? And sometimes the judge will put that defendant under oath and do a colloquy with the defendant and subtly bring out whose decision it is to take the stand. That's one way to do it without breaching any attorney-client privilege. The second way is they'll ask the prosecutor, do you mind if we have a sidebar? We'll have a colloquy among the judge, the defense attorneys, and the defendant. Sidebar, you're not there, Mr. Rossi. We'll put that under seal, and I'll ask questions in the sidebar. I never cared about that because it protects the record. I want to know eventually, for appeal purposes and at habeas corpus, what the decision was.
Hey, Gene, the verdict comes in, she's guilty, and this beaut actually can't stop yapping. So she decides she's going to speak. Usually they throw the lawyer under the bus, I always say, between 17 and 19 days. But this woman's like within 17 to 19 minutes. She cannot help herself. And I think we're going to see a clip right now of her speaking, which is very consistent with the way I think she came off in front of the jury. Let's go to it. Gene, I'm not gonna lie to you. Look, even as a prosecutor, I put people in jail for really long periods of time in my career, and I didn't do that with any kind of exuberance. I always kind of felt it was a sad thing, but I felt proud of what it was we did protecting the community. But I didn't take pleasure in the pain of another human being. She makes it very difficult to have any level of sympathy. I have never seen somebody so unappealing and utterly grotesque than this woman in a courtroom.
Hubris, but I had an epiphany. The words that came out of her mouth and her demeanor suggest to me that she alone made the decision to take the stand, and the defense attorneys were begging her not to take the stand. You know why, Bob? Because they see the same thing we see, that she's a horrible witness. And they probably told her, if you take the stand, no one will like you. And there was probably tension there. And then she wanted to probably bring out a lot of stuff in her direct testimony that the attorneys for her probably said, you can't do that. The judge won't allow it. So that's what I saw, a person who wanted to take the stand and wanted to bring out all this prejudicial stuff and irrelevant stuff.
You know, Gene, we kind of talked about it before when we were doing the Love case and many other cases that we talk about. When people get up there, some of them, and a lot of the people in the chat room are using this word to describe it over and over again, may I add, narcissistic. You know, there's this I can control it. I can manipulate it. I can give hashtag fake data and they'll believe it. But there's just something peculiarly, you know, disgusting about the manner in which she presented herself. There's just such an unlikability factor. Just like here, she's going for her sentencing, and the first thing she does is throw her lawyers under the bus.
Absolutely. And I think we may have discussed this, but if a defendant files an ineffective assistance of counsel, guess what happens? The attorney-client privilege is waived, so at a hearing down the road, she will have to testify against her own attorneys for the court to decide whether those attorneys were effective. I had 2 or 3 of these hearings. They're actually very enjoyable because you learn about how they represent their clients.
You know, Gene, I just want to DMB mom on our chat room. I didn't watch all of her testimony, indicated at certain points in time. I can believe this to be completely true, that she was literally writing questions for her lawyers. Let's talk a little bit about that. You know, when you're in your cadence and you're doing examination, I get that somebody can write a note, maybe you missed a little this, you missed a little that, but every now and again you get that real special person, that person who telling you how to do your job and completely destroys your ability to be able to do it because they keep interrupting you.
And guess what, Bob? I wasn't in the trial. I didn't see what the jury was looking at. But if you see a defendant who's very aggressive in writing questions and handing those yellow pieces of paper to the defense attorney, what's the theory of the prosecutor's case? Tammy Moore is a person who is the brain,
right,
the mastermind. And if she's sitting at counsel table trying to mastermind her own case, she's supporting the government's argument.
Gene, that is an excellent point. So much gets said by them watching the defendant, even when they don't take the stand. And sometimes you just can't control those folks, and they do themselves a lot of harm. Excellent point, Gene. Listen, guys, we got to go to a break. I can't wait to come back to talk more, and not more Tammy Moore, but let's get back into love shortly, or more, whatever. We'll be back. Yeah, so Kendra Hatcher's boyfriend, Gene, it's terrible when you got to bring people through reliving something like this a second time.
And the prep sessions are even worse, Bob, as you know. I'm surprised he's holding it together. I'm sure there were a lot of tears in the prep session. He's a powerful witness. I can hear his testimony.
Right. So I guess we Gene, they know that we're so good that we could be listening to the testimony and me and you talking at the same time.
Hey, Bob.
That's what we got to do that trial, right, Gene?
We're ambidextrous.
Absolutely. You got to be able to keep on going. If they could blow up something right next to me, something go on fire, I'm still cross-examining unless that judge says stop. And I know you do that too, Gene. But you're right. It's gut-wrenching bringing them down there. And I especially would tell parents, at the end of the day, there's going to be an end here, and hopefully it's a guilty verdict. But somewhere you'll be elated for a little while, but the reality will sink in that it'll never bring your little girl or your little boy back. And I've seen that happen over and over again. And so mom testified in this case as well. And, again, another gut-wrenching scenario. Here the boyfriend is the motive that Delgado did this for, but there's so many collateral consequences and loss all around the table. This was such a beautiful woman with a great profession, great education, doing great stuff. You can only imagine the horror she went through and how mom must feel about her last moments. Let's check it out. Wow, Gene, no matter how many trials that I have gone through and commentary on cases, I still well up with tears when I hear somebody like that mother talk about essentially everything that this young, beautiful daughter of hers was looking forward to. And she is a mom looking forward to maybe marriage, kids, grandkids. It's terrible.
Yeah, and what's powerful is Ricky, I'll just call him Ricky, the boyfriend. He's a dermatologist. And they had set up, according to what I've read, they set up a wedding fund in August, a few weeks before the murder. and they had so many high hopes. They were going to Mexico for a trip, a vacation, and it's a very sad situation, very sad.
Yeah, and this is why this is a death penalty case. And the picture on the wall aside, this is really, really powerful testimony. I think, Gene, a lot of times people just see so much violence in today's culture that even showing a picture of her laying in a puddle of blood, sadly to say, may not be as impactful as Mom's testimony was.
Yeah, absolutely right. Sometimes the photos of the crime scene and the death, you have to show those, Bob. But at the end of the day, Ricky's testimony and the mother's testimony are probably the most powerful because you add the emotion and the tears, and that makes a case compelling.
Right, definitely. So, when the prosecutor is doing a death penalty case, to get back to that piece, let's be honest, we're presenting a case, we're presenting an argument, we're advocating for the ultimate penalty. And so as we talked about before, every single witness you put on, Gene, you're not just thinking about guilt, you're kind of past that. You're thinking about the punishment in the sentencing phase. And these were two extremely powerful witnesses that this jury will not forget.
Oh, absolutely. This is basically the death penalty phase, although it's going to be repeated.
Right.
They're going for broke because academically, the mother's testimony, I couldn't hear it all, but I don't know if there was anything truly relevant to the alleged charge.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, Gene. Yeah, they're obviously going to try to make an argument. That's why that witness is allowed. But nevertheless, it's probably more for the impact. I don't disagree with you. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back. Man, I am just having a blast here at the Law and Crime Network. I got my friend Gene Rossi. We're talking all about our Italian upbringing and Italian food and growing up Italian. I always love that. And unfortunately, Gene, or fortunately for the audience, we can't go through that, but we can do top crime. So we're going to go to that. We'll be right back.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. The gunman suspected of killing a University of Utah track and field team member was found dead in a Salt Lake City church. 37-year-old Melvin Rowland, a registered sex offender, was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the Trinity AME church. Authorities were pursuing Rowland after he allegedly shot and killed his ex-girlfriend, 21-year-old Lauren McCluskey, as she spoke to her mother on the phone near a dormitory on campus. Rowland was convicted of attempted forcible sex abuse and enticing a minor over the internet in 2004 and was registered as a sex offender. Former New York Mets star outfielder Lenny Dykstra pleaded not guilty to criminal charges from an incident with an Uber driver in New Jersey. Dykstra was arrested after reportedly arguing with his Uber driver and allegedly placed a bag with what the driver believed was a gun against the driver's head and threatened to shoot the man if he didn't take him to Staten Island. When police arrived, they found cocaine, MDMA, and marijuana on Dykstra, and he was taken into custody. Dykstra now faces drug charges and one count of making terroristic threats in the third degree. A man from Florida accused of groping a fellow female passenger on a Southwest Airlines flight from Houston to Albuquerque reportedly told investigators the inappropriate touching was okay, since President Trump says it's okay. 49-year-old Bruce Michael Alexander of Tampa was arrested and charged with abusive sexual contact after he reportedly grabbed a woman's breast during the flight. Alexander remains in custody pending a preliminary hearing and detention hearing. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Gene, our producer, has been kind enough to give us an opportunity to speak really quickly about two of those stories. The first one is, what is going on with Lenny Dykstra? I mean, he was like my idol in the Mets. How the mighty have fallen. It's sad to see stuff like this.
In 1986, I was rooting for the Red Sox. I remember when Calvin Schiraldi blew a 3-run lead in the 6th game, and then they blew a 3-1 lead in the 7th game. Lenny Dykstra was a machine, but he was always on the precipice of disaster. He always had substance issues, and it's very sad.
Yeah, it is. Now, this other character we got here that's groping people or sexually assaulting them because of the Trump, connection here, it's obviously ludicrous, absurd. It's a crime. It won't amount to a defense. But I don't know, Gene. I'm seeing a lot of weirdness with people that have been activated from below the surface of proper human behavior into doing some crazy stuff lately. Have you seen this?
Yes. When you see nastiness in Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and on TV, you're going to react to it if you're susceptible. And this man was susceptible to all that nastiness, and he literally took what Trump would say as sort of a directive that he can do what he wants on an airplane.
You know, Gene, as prosecutors, I used to say to my wife all the time that I think that people would really be shocked. We investigate lots of cases, and not all of them result necessarily in charges. But there is like a strata of people that are just below the mental sanity point, and all they need is just to be activated with language. And boy, I think that's happening more and more today. People don't realize how dangerous there are some people that feel empowered now to act out on their lunacy.
Well, in Northern Virginia, we had a spray paint incident on a synagogue. Somebody spray painted swastikas. This is about a month ago. And the anger out there is just percolating.
Well, look what you see today happening at CNN with and all over apparently the country. I'm in the studio right now, but I'm kind of getting glimpses that these packages are being sent all around. Again, another person activated, some maniac, and they don't have to be unintelligent. They can be smart, and they can do a lot of carnage.
Yes, anger and hatred are, as you say, are under the surface, and it just takes a little match to have it explode.
Right. Okay. Well, listen. Enough of that happiness. Let's move on to the love case right now. And their mom's been there. We talked about the collateral consequences to other people's lives, like the boyfriend. Really heart-wrenching testimony in my mind from mom that this was the one, this was the guy. You can only imagine. But also friends and family members are affected too. Angelica Gordon is a friend of the defendant and the accomplices. So let's take a look at that testimony. Okay, so Gene, what are you making of this testimony? She's identified the defendant in the courtroom. It's always dramatic in my mind when anybody's just sitting there and pointing that finger. That's why I stipulate very quickly as a defense lawyer, so there doesn't need to be that confrontation. But this testimony about Crystal and Brenda and talking in Spanish and then translating it over to love in English, I like this feel. What are your thoughts?
Powerful. You are placing the three amigos, if you will, Brenda, Crystal, and Love in a room, and he doesn't speak Spanish, and you got Brenda and Crystal talking Spanish, and then Crystal interprets. And what's great about this witness is twofold. One, Angelica Gordon corroborates what Crystal has said, that the three of them have met. Love, Brenda, and Crystal. That's number one. And number two, what's great about her is if she's going to lie, if she's going to not tell the truth, she will say, I heard A, B, and C. I heard them planning a murder. But she doesn't. She says, I could kind of hear them talking in English, but I knew they were talking together. That's even better.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Hey, listen, Gene, just as an update, because I am just like you, possessed by this issue of the pictures hanging in the courtroom, and our great people here at the Law and Crime Network are doing what they can to find answers. On the court record, on the electronic record, as I understand it, there does not, N-O-T, appear to be a motion by the defense, at least pursuant to the electronic record that we are looking at, to bar, ban, or remove those pictures. And we called down to the courthouse, actually, and were advised that if we want to find out if there was a motion filed, more specifically, to contact the attorneys on the case. So obviously, we're not going to probably get any answers to that, but that's what we know right now. I figured I'd give you that update.
That scares me.
Yeah, it kind of goes to your point, though. We'll just take a quick little sidebar here, that this could very well cause, if there was not even the motion made. If it was made, it was argued, and the judge allowed it, it's one thing. If it's not made at all, and it can be argued to be prejudicial, which I can't imagine anyone could say it's not, and that it was not relevant evidence, and that it was not sought to be excluded, that it could be the basis for a habeas ineffective assistance of counsel down the road.
I got to make a comment, though. Bob, they have to make a record. Mm-hmm. They haven't made the motion to get the two photos down, but when it goes up on appeal, how are you going to prove that there were two photos next to the witness box?
Well, I think the record would be, that's a very fine point, but I think that the videotaped evidence itself shows that it happens. You can certainly submit an affidavit or certification. I don't think anybody's going to get around the fact that there's a picture right now of this beautiful young woman victim in this case. But nevertheless, it's something that, you know, even from the prosecutorial standpoint, Gene, I'm just curious. Sometimes you need to protect the record as a prosecutor for the defense attorney's malfeasance, especially in a death penalty case. Can you explain that little nuance?
Yes. Whenever I prosecuted a case, I hate to say it, there were some times when I was both the prosecutor and a defense attorney, because I did have defense attorneys that they weren't on their game, and they weren't making all the motions that I thought they should. And I remember one time I made a motion for judgment of acquittal in a criminal case because the other side had forgotten to do it. And the reason I do that is I'm trying to protect the record. And I'm always worried about if you win the battle but lose the war. You get a conviction, but it comes back on a reversal. You know, retrying a case is like putting on a wet bathing suit. You don't want to do that. So that's why I used to really take umbrage when the defense attorney was not doing their job.
Win the battle, lose the war is a favorite expression of mine. Wet bathing suit I've never used. I'm going to modify it a little bit to a wet, sandy bathing suit because that's really the thing you don't want to do. But your points are well taken legally. It is like putting on a wet, sandy bathing suit. So prosecutors have to actually protect the defendant from the defense attorney many times in order to preserve the conviction. Gene, only a guy like you could I get those kind of nuances out with on the show. Greatly appreciate it. We have another clip here of a friend that's going to be testifying. These people, in my opinion, are damning to Love's case and moving that ball directly towards death penalty. Okay, welcome back. So, Gene, real quick, I mean, this witness, Milton Martinez, brutal. Brenda Delgado, obsessed, involved in a triangle, he said. I'm sure he meant a love triangle. Leave it alone. Drop it. She wants somebody to find somebody for her to hurt the victim in the case, i.e. another person, i.e. Love is in the courtroom being that person that state alleges. This is a rough witness.
Best decision Brenda Delgado made was going to Mexico, because when she came back, they asked us to drop the death penalty. If she hadn't done that, she definitely would have gotten a death penalty, because this witness shows criminal, malicious, premeditated intent with no conscience.
Yeah, we had talked about that once before, Gene, that's why the hit for higher aggravating factor in a penalty case, in my estimation, is the best. It's not in the heat of the moment. It's really purposeful. It's really plotted. There's a lot of conspiracy. There's a lot of opportunities to renunciate or to move away from the conduct, but nevertheless, they go forward with it. So let's get to the point, though. You just brought up about the Mexican thing. And explain that a little bit about the extradition treaty and just add to it, if you will, at the end. Do you think that maybe Love's lawyers will argue, is it fair she doesn't get the death penalty and he does?
Yes, proportionality. You have to argue that in the death penalty phase. But let's talk about the extradition. Mexico doesn't have the death penalty. So we have an extradition treaty with Mexico, and what they do is, okay, United States, you want Brenda Delgado? All right, we'll let you have her, but you have to agree that you will not get the death penalty and you will not seek it, because we don't have it here. It's part of our treaty with you. So we'll send her back, but you can't seek the death penalty. But going back to proportionality, at the death penalty phase, they have to argue proportionality and bring out that Brenda's only going to get life at best. And that could save possibly Christopher Love. Could save.
Okay, excellent analysis, Gene. I say it doesn't save him, and I say that survives appeal, but that certainly would be the argument, the proportionality argument that the defense would make. And there's really not a lot of great arguments for the defense to make, so it's one you can suppose they will definitely go to. Guys, we got to go to break. Thanks, Gene. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, let me make a couple programming notes. First of all, as I said earlier in the show, we are now on Pluto TV, and I think that's awesome. Our stuff is going crazy. So if you want to go online and see all the different platforms we're on here at the Law and Crime Network at Dan Abrams Production, please do that. And as always, be in that chat room. We love watching you guys because you give us a lot of leads to go on, if you will. Gene, I don't want to sound overly effusive about this police officer, this detective, but I think there's one part that we are missing a little bit about him. He's not only skilled in policy, he's answering very short, concise. The prosecutor right now is asking him questions. Court is adjourned. The defense will come back on cross. I can't wait to see how he handles himself on cross. But the thing I really love about him is he knows his case when he's doing the interview, and he's watching the data that's coming to him with the most important tool we all possess in the law, our common sense, which often I find is abandoned by lawyers and detectives when they're investigating and prosecuting cases. What do you think?
Also beautiful about him is, well, number one, his pulse is probably 35 a minute. He's so relaxed. But there's a little subtle thing that he's doing that's brilliant. He's being very respectful to the prosecutor, and he's not doing what I call the death stare, where you're asked a question, you turn to the jury, give an answer, then you go back and look at the prosecutor, because that looks phony. He's looking at the jury occasionally because he wants to have sort of a conversation like they're at a dinner table. I just remembered something. What was probably devastating in Tammy Moore's testimony, switching gears, is she was staring at the jury during her answers. The jury probably thought that was totally phony. He's not a phony, and he's not doing that.
Yeah, I've actually had jurors that have indicated that they felt intimidated by the defendants looking at them, when it could very well be that they didn't mean that to happen. Actually had a very interesting case that went up on appeal because of that very issue. Gene, I know you're supposed to leave at 2:30. I understand.
2:40.
You can give us another 10 minutes, Gene Rossi?
Absolutely. Hey, as long as we talk about polenta.
Well, you know what? If you could do another 10 minutes, I am going to go immediately to break, talk to you about polenta, come back, and maybe we'll flip that script.